Welcome. We're going to start this evening's presentation. My name is Lyle Skritzmeyer, and I'm honored to serve as co-chair of JustFaith's board of directors. Like you, my life changed after taking my first JustFaith program, the foundational JustFaith program. I did undergo a spiritual transformation that changed my priorities, and more importantly, was a call to action. It was a start of my engagement in compassion and solidarity with the outside world, especially the vulnerable and marginalized. That is why I support JustFaith Ministries. It's hard to believe that 20 years ago, JustFaith Ministries began our work inspiring people like you to change the world. What began as a seed now stands at 65,000 program graduates. These graduates have gone out to their communities and changed them for the better by working for equity and justice. On our 20th anniversary, we want to celebrate you and thank you for all that you have done. Participating in our programs, inviting others to take JustFaith Ministry programming. For our unsung heroes, the co-facilitators and local organizers who are the lifeblood and local face of JustFaith Ministries. For your financial support that makes our program offerings possible. And finally, and most importantly, for going out into the community to bring about peace and justice. As a way of honoring you, your support, and all you've done to change the lives in your communities across the United States, we've lined up these presentations for you to honor you and your work. We invite you to register for upcoming events using the link in chat. I'd like to move to our opening prayer entitled The Guest House it's a poem by Rumi. This being human is a great house. Every morning, a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all. Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep into your house, empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at your door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each who has been sent as a guide from beyond. It's my pleasure to introduce Christian Dollar. Christian is the program director for JustFaith Ministries.
Tonight I have the enormous honor of introducing my grand predecessor, who is a former director of programs, Cory Lockhart. Cory is a teacher, an artist, a public speaker, and a peacemaker. She facilitates classes and workshops and conversations using a nonviolent communication framework. She wrote our program called Cultivating Nonviolence, Harvesting Peace, one of my personal favorite of our programs. And she also created the Crossroads Ministry program called Seeking the Shalom of the City, Revisiting and Revisioning Louisville. In addition, Cory is consulting with us on our upcoming program called Want to Talk, Communication Tools for Divided Times. And I leave our consulting sessions not only with resources and learning tools for the program, but also with some genuinely life-changing wisdom for my own life as well. Thank you so much, Cory, for sharing your wisdom with us today. You all are in for a treat. One final note before Cory begins, there will be a Q&A after Cory's presentation, so be thinking about your questions. And those questions can be directed to me, Kristen, through the chat function. So thanks again, Cory, and I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks, Lyle, and thanks to all of you from JustFaith Ministry. It is such a delight to be here with you, and I'm seeing faces and names that I know, which makes me even more excited, and I want to greet you all by name, and there's not time to do that. So just please know that that it gives me such great joy to see you, and I hope that I'll be able to greet you personally sometime soon. So tonight's presentation, I'm going to be screen sharing. There will be points at which I will ask for your input and ask you to put things in the chat. There may be times when I ask you to speak. And as Kristen said, if you have questions, you can direct those to her, and then depending on time and how many questions there are, we'll get to as many as we can after the presentation. I love the poem that we started with. It's a poem by Rumi, and another part of a poem by Rumi is what inspires me and inspires the presentation that I'm giving this evening. And I'm going to go ahead and begin screen sharing. So we're talking about this idea of meeting the field, and the framework that I'm going to offer, or a part of the framework that I'm going to offer, is a nonviolent communication framework. And nearly every time I talk about nonviolent communication, I begin with this quote. And again, it is from a different Rumi poem. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and rightdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. And I use that because the world that we live in now, the culture that we live in now, is very much one of shame, blame, judgment, and criticism. It's a framework of right and wrong, good and bad, or good and evil. So we live in these binaries. And the invitation that I want to make tonight, and even in our Christian religion, right, we talk about good and bad, right and wrong. It is everywhere. We are immersed in that. And so with this idea of meeting in the field, I want us to experiment with, try on, see what it might be like to step into a different framework. And that's the framework of that field that doesn't live in wrongdoing and rightdoing. And with this practice of nonviolent communication, the primary goal, the goal of meeting in that field, is to connect. Again, the framework that I'll be using is a compassionate or a nonviolent communication framework. It's based on the work of Marshall Rosenberg and others who influenced him. He actually said that really his work came from the foundational principles of the major religions. And in this compassionate or nonviolent communication framework, the primary goal is connection. The primary connection is with ourselves. It's the one that we have the most control over, because when I am connected, even partially, when I have some clarity within myself, I can more easily connect with other people without losing myself. Some of us are really, really good at connecting with other people, and we're so good at it that we do it to the detriment of having any connection with ourselves, or having any clarity with what's going on with ourselves. And so what we're talking about is cultivating connection with others, as well as having that connection and clarity with ourselves. Because when we feel connected, compassion and empathy naturally flow. We are interconnected. We live in an interconnected world, in some ways that we know, in ways that we don't know. And so when we know that interconnection, compassion and empathy naturally flow, because if I feel connected to Kristen, or if I feel connected to Jack, or to Susie, or to Jim, I'm going to want you to be well. Because I know that if you are well at a deep level, at a gut level, that's going to ripple out towards me, and that's going to ripple out towards others. And when I'm well, that also ripples out. That connection fosters the well-being that ripples beyond us, sometimes in ways that we know, and very often in ways that we don't know. So our primary goal is connection, awareness of the connection that already is. The primary tool is curiosity, bringing a sense of wonder, bringing a sense of, I wonder what would happen if, with an openness. And what we're talking about is a practice. Just like meditation is a practice and prayer is a practice and playing a sport or an instrument is a practice, this too is a practice. And with any practice, what we're talking about with any practice, there are going to be times when we do the practice in just the way that we want. And there are going to be times when the practice doesn't go the way that we hoped it would. But because we know it's a practice, we know that we can come back to it in the next minute, in the next hour, on the next day, and we can try again and perhaps find the results that we're looking for or get closer to what we hope to do or how we hope to practice. So this is a time when I'm going to ask you to put things in the chat. And what I would love to hear from you, and I'm going to qualify this question, is your answer to this. What makes for a good life? And I want you to think about it in this way. If you were to ask any person in any place in the world at any time in history, what makes for a good life or what makes for a life of thriving, what kind of answers might you or might that person in some other place at some other time give? Whatever those answers are, whatever comes to mind, go ahead and put them in the chat. Depending on how many answers are in the chat, I may see some, I may not see them all, but I'll read as many as I can. Peace and health, care, strong relationships, loving family and friends, to know yourself, safety, time with family, connection, love, good relationships, food, a supportive and thriving community. Yes, 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 beloved community. Thriving comes from having good friends and family. Yes. And so these kinds of things that you've mentioned, many of you said love, you said community, we have safety, I see, awareness, food. If we were to ask any person, security, comfort, yes, meaningfulness, hope. If we ask any person at any point in history, in any place in the world, we're going to get these same kinds of answers: food, shelter, safety, love, community, connection. And the reason that I ask this question is because this is really what's at the core of the nonviolent communication or compassionate communication framework. And these are what we would call universal human needs or universal human values. If you're familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, Maslow has that diagram of these basic needs that all people have. And these really are at the core of NVC. And we focus on needs. And when I think about this, I think about it, I always point to my belly. You can't see that, but my hand is on my belly at the center of my being. And we focus on these needs instead of that right, wrong thinking. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with the world? Because universal human needs are points of connection. Universal human needs are points of connection. Someone may be doing something that I have a lot of thoughts, a lot of judgments, a lot of criticisms of. And yet, if I can connect with that universal human need that they are trying to meet by that thing they're doing that I'm criticizing, then that can help me to enter into a place of connection with them, that can take me from the judgments and criticisms that are going on in my head down to that place at my core, connecting with what may be going on at their core. So it takes us beneath those messages of shame, blame, judgment, criticism, and I also often add punishment now, to what's going on at the gut level, at the core. These needs, just as you wrote them in the chat, are not connected to particular people, places, or times. The ways that we meet the needs are particular to particular people, places, and times. But the beautiful thing is, if we are identifying the needs for ourselves, we may deeply, deeply want a particular person to meet that need in a particular way, at a particular place, in a particular time. But if we know what that need is, if that person cannot or won't meet us in the need, there's like 7 billion other people in the world. And it is possible that if that one who we deeply want to meet our need can't, that one of the other 7 billion people might be able to help us meet that need. Or if we can't help someone meet their need, then perhaps one of the other 7 billion plus people in the world can help that person or group of people to meet their needs. Marshall Rosenberg would say, and I believe that it is true, that everything we say and do is one of two things. It's either an expression of gratitude for a need met or an attempt to meet our needs. He often would call it a tragic expression of unmet needs. And for many of us, we are not well equipped to easily identify those gut level needs. We don't really live in a culture that encourages us to have that gut level awareness of what's going on. And so then the question becomes, how do we figure out, how do we connect to those gut level needs? And Rosenberg would say, and I believe that it is true, that it is through our feelings. And when I talk about my feelings, I point to the heart space. So when I talk about those universal needs, I point to my belly, the center, the core of my being. When I talk about the feelings, I talk about the heart space. And it is as we notice our feelings that can help us to understand what's going on at the gut level. This is going to be another time when I'm going to ask you to put something in the chat. This is a simple example, but probably something we've all experienced. Let's say that yesterday morning you get in touch with a friend and said, hey, you left a message on their phone, didn't actually get to talk to them, and said, hey, I'd really like to go to dinner tonight. Can you join me? And the day goes by and you don't get a response from your friend. If that were the case, you left a message for a friend, said, hey, let's get dinner tonight. The day goes by and you don't hear from your friend. What might be the thoughts that happen for you, and or what might be some feelings that come up for you? You can put, if you know thoughts and feelings, you can put both in the chat. If you just can identify one or the other, then put one or the other in the chat. I'm going to read as many as I can. Is my friend okay? Maybe they didn't get my message. Are you okay? Check your darn phone. Disappointed. Why am I being ignored? Worrying about the friend, feeling frustrated. She's busy. Disappointed. Did I do something wrong? Sadness and abandonment. Yes. Patience, tolerance, acceptance. Are you safe? Yes. So as we're having those thoughts, so I'm going to address just a few of them. So one, many of you I saw wrote, are they okay? So the thoughts that are happening are, is he or she okay? The feelings that probably are coming up are concern or worry. And what that's pointing to, I'm guessing, at the gut level, at that needs level, is not my own personal need for safety. Probably I am safe, I'm guessing, but that points to the value of safety. It's not just that I want myself to be safe, but I also want my friend and hope that my friend is well, that they are experiencing well-being, that they are experiencing safety. And so that question, are they okay, with the worry and concern, points at the core level to the desire for health and safety, the value of health and safety, and probably also the desire for clarity of what's going on and understanding. So I saw a few of you say something like, why are they ignoring me? Or what have I done to upset them? So we're thinking, there might be an interpersonal issue going on that might bring up some worry, concern. It might bring up some frustration. Maybe it brings up some hurt or some grief. And at that gut level, my guess is, again, we're wanting some clarity, but also really wanting that connection. If we're asking, what have I done to upset her? Or did I do something wrong? We might be looking for acceptance from our friend. And so if we are not getting, if we're not sure what's going on, we might look to someone else, or might see what we can do for ourselves to offer ourselves what we're not getting from that friend. I'm going to see if I can scroll through here a little more. She's mad at me. I don't matter. And so if I'm thinking she's mad at me, that I don't matter, again, the value that So there's probably some hurt there, maybe some feelings of self-consciousness, maybe some shame. And at the gut level, probably what we're wanting, along with the connection, along with the clarity, is that acceptance. And so something as simple as not hearing back from a friend can pull up really core needs and values in us. These things are coming up all the time, and yet we may not have the awareness of what's happening. So as we're paying attention to our thoughts, as we're paying attention to our feelings, that can help us to connect with what the need is, what the value is. And I differentiate needs and values as needs being particular to me or another person, or perhaps even a group of people. And I talk about values as when I want it not only for myself, but I want it for everyone. So thankfully, on a day-to-day basis, my need for safety is being met. But even though my personal need for safety is met, because I value safety, I want it not only for me, but for all other people. So those different feelings, different thoughts help us to get to what's going on, what needs are being met or unmet. And this really, from an NVC framework, this is the core of empathy. All of us experience the same feelings. We all have the same needs. Different or the same event or type of event can stimulate different feelings for different people, but all of us know what it means to be sad. We all know what it is to be angry. We all know what it is to be relaxed and excited and thankful. We also all know what it is to want community, to want rest, to want play, to want acceptance. And so when we connect to that heart space, because those feelings and needs are universal, all people experience in them, when we tune into the feelings in that heart space, when we tune into the needs in that gut space, we can connect with ourselves and we can connect to other people. And the empathic connection generally does not happen when we are operating solely from this space, from the space of our head. I'm not saying that we want to be disconnected from what's happening in our head. Those thoughts are really important. They give us really useful information. The hope is that what's happening in our head can be connected to what's happening in our hearts, can be connected to what's happening at our core in our gut. We live in polarized times, as I'm sure you're well aware of, and there may be conversations or arguments that we are invited into, intentionally invited into, or perhaps unintentionally invited into. And so much of this process of nonviolent or compassionate communication is about bringing consciousness to what is already happening. And so one of the ways that I would encourage bringing consciousness to thinking about, am I going to go into that field, is by asking two questions. And so the first question is this: is it worth my time and energy to engage in the conversation? Is it worth my time and energy to walk towards that field? And there are really three possible answers. The first is yes. Yes, it's worth my time and energy. I'm in, let's do it. The second answer is no. It is not worth my time and energy. I will not engage in this conversation. It's too costly. And there are a lot of reasons why it might be too costly that I won't go into. Or at least not now. And the third answer is yes, but. Yes, but might look like this. Yes, in general, this conversation is worth my time and energy, but I think it's a half-hour conversation and I only have 5 minutes right now. Yes, this conversation is worth my time and energy, but I'm pretty muddled right now. And if I enter into the conversation, I'm not going to be entering into it in the way that I hope. Yes, but I am exhausted. And again, I won't be able to engage with the same kind of presence that I want to engage. Maybe the answer is yes, but I actually would like someone supporting me or supporting us in having the conversation because it feels too risky to enter in by myself. So once you have the clarity of yes, but, or no, the second question is it more important to be connected or to be right or to win the conversation? And when I ask this question, I always quote two Louisvillians. The first is Chris Hartman, who happens to be the head of the Fairness Campaign here in Louisville. And he says, the goal or the conversation itself, when we are willing to go into that field, having the conversation itself is the win. It's not about changing somebody's mind. It's not about, showing how we're right and we're wrong and they're wrong, excuse me. It is about actually having the conversation, being willing to step into the field. The other person that I always quote in thinking about this question is Tori Mcclure. She is the president of Spalding University here in Louisville. She also was the first woman to row solo across the Atlantic. She is accomplished in a multiplicity of ways. And in a conversation I had with her at one point, she said, if I go into a conversation and my goal is to win, I've already lost. If I go into a conversation and my goal is to win, I've already lost. And the way that I understand that, thinking about that idea of the primary goal is connection and the primary tool is curiosity, is if I go into a conversation and my goal is to win, then I don't have any need to engage my curiosity. Or maybe I'm engaging it just enough so I can shoot the other person down. But really, I'm not open to my own expansion, to my own growth, to my own learning. Now, I do want to say that the kinds of conversations that I'm talking about are not where there is harm being done in the moment. There are different questions to ask. If that's the context, then we want to end the harm first, and then think about perhaps having a conversation later. But this is when we've been invited into an argument, invited into a conversation, then we can bring some consciousness of, is this worth my time and energy? And do I want to connect or do I want to win? Do I want to be right? I don't have any judgment as to what you decide, but if your answers are yes, or yes, but, and to the first question, and if your answer to the second question is connected, in other words, I do want to go in that field. I want to experiment with something beyond wrongdoing and right doing. Then we're going to work on that cultivation of connection. And what I would encourage, knowing that the primary connection is with ourselves, it's the one that we have the most control over. And even that, there are things that happen in our body that sometimes disconnect us. The invitation is to just bring some awareness. It's not going to be full awareness, probably, but some awareness to what's happening within ourselves. Noticing our bodies. We might notice that all of a sudden our heart is beating really fast. Maybe our shoulders are up to our ears, or our face is getting red, or we're sweating. That's helpful, useful. It's useful information to get in touch with ourselves. It might also inform whether or not I'm ready to have the conversation. Notice what's happening in your mind. Are you all of a sudden thinking all sorts of nasty things about yourself, about the other person? I don't have any judgment about you doing that. Probably all of us do it. And it's really useful information, because what those, unkind thoughts are telling us is that a need is perhaps screaming out to us. See if there are any emotions that you're aware of. See if there are any needs that you can identify in the moment. And again, when you're doing a check-in like that, when you don't have spaciousness to do some long reflection, anything that you notice is helpful information. And then you can decide how much. Sometimes it's a whether or not. Sometimes it's a how much to express about what's going on with you. And there are internal strategies that we can implement here. When our emotions are high, we tend to get faster. And one of my teachers, I'm taking actually a year-long class with her named Mickey Cashtan. One of the things that she said that really resonated with me is she said something like, her mind moves really fast. And for her, when she takes time to pause by taking a deep breath or 2 or 3, for her, and I believe it's true for me, and I suspect maybe it's true for some of you too, it gives her emotions time to catch up with her mind. Because the mind's doing all this stuff, and the judgments and the criticism and they're wrong and I can't believe it. Oh my God. When we take those breaths, it helps us to get reconnected, can help us move from this head space down into the heart space, and maybe even get to that gut space. We might be willing and really desiring to be in that field. And the other person who we're engaging in conversation with may or may not be ready to step into the field. And so even as you are really trying to step out of wrongdoing and rightdoing, that other person might really be in that place of wrong and right, good and bad, shame, blame, judgment, criticism. And if they are throwing shame, blame, judgment, and criticism around, you can remind yourself, if we believe that everything we say and do, not only me, but also every one of you, is an attempt to meet a need, then we can remind ourselves all of this shame, blame, judgment, criticism, right, wrong stuff is not actually about me. I may have been the one who stimulated it, but it's not actually about me. This is their way of communicating a need. And it may be a need that they're aware of, and in all likelihood, because again, many of us are not particularly adept and well-trained in identifying our needs, it might be a need that they're not even aware of. And this is how they're expressing it, through the shame, blame, and judgment and criticism. At that point, perhaps we can turn and move down for ourselves and see if we can connect to what may be going on with that other person. I do want to just offer this. If we've said yes, if we're in the conversation and this happens and it comes to us in a way that is so forceful that it feels overly aggressive or antagonistic, it doesn't mean that we have to stay in the conversation. We can change our minds and say no and end the conversation. But if we have that willingness to stay in the conversation, even as they're lobbing the shame, blame, judgment, and criticism at us, then we can move to that place of curiosity. And there are numerous ways to do that. From a nonviolent communication perspective, where we're tuning into the feelings and needs, we can try to step into their shoes and to imagine the feelings or the needs that person is experiencing and try to connect to them. Wow, it sounds like you're really upset. And maybe they even use those words and repeating it back. When we hear our own words repeated back, we know that we're being heard. And if you make a wrong guess, it gives the other person an opportunity to get clear too. Gosh, it sounds like you really are feeling upset because you so want greater community, because you're so distraught by the disconnection that you're seeing around you. Wow, it sounds like, it sounds like you're really scared of what's going to happen in this situation. And if we are making that real attempt to step into their shoes, they can feel it. Even if the words that you're using are not quite right, we can feel when people are trying to connect with us. We can feel when people are trying to connect with us. Depending on what the topic is, another way to engage our curiosity is just asking the question. And if having gone through Just Faith programs, I imagine that at some point you've seen or asked or been asked this question. Can you tell me more about why you think that? Or perhaps, how did you come to that perspective? And of course, there are ways that we can ask any of these things that are in ways that are connecting, and we can ask these questions with similar words that aren't particularly connecting. Why the heck are you so angry? Is still getting and identifying the anger, but is not doing so in a connecting way. How the heck could you think that? Is kind of getting to, how did you come to that perspective? But my tone of voice and the particular word choice is not connecting. We can also feel, just as we can feel when someone is trying to connect, we can also feel when there's an edge to the questions or the comments. And checking our understanding. And this again might include connecting with the feelings and needs. So I think what I'm hearing you say is, am I getting that right? And if I am, then the person will tell us. And if I'm not, that gives both of us an opportunity to co-create some understanding. And it is really a co-creation. It is a process that we are in together. There's an organization called the Free Listening Project, or the Urban Confessional. And one of the things that I quote from their website, these maybe aren't the exact words, but the words are something like, being heard is so close to being loved that most of us don't know the difference. Being heard is so close to being loved that most of us don't know the difference. And so when we are willing to step into that field and to listen, we are giving someone that experience of love, of coming in with that open-hearted curiosity, with that desire to connect, to mend, I would say, the places of disconnection that that people are experiencing all over. And I think this is my last slide before my thank you. So this is just a teeny tiny little taste of this nonviolent communication framework. And I bring us back to where I started. Of the primary goal is connection. And the primary tool is curiosity. We can turn that curiosity inward towards ourselves to bring clarity and understanding. We can turn that curiosity out towards others to bring that clarity or a greater sense of clarity and understanding. And when we are well-resourced, when we have capacity, ideally we'll be able to do both, to bring that curiosity and that desire for connection to ourselves and to others. Normally, when I'm doing a presentation like this, I have 2 hours. So a half hour feels really, really short, and we do some practice in these. But this is where I've been talking a lot. And so I am going to just say thank you. And thanks to Just Faith Ministries for having me here. Thanks to you for being here. Happy 20th anniversary, Just Faith. And I think I particularly want to say that to Jack, who I saw in here. And I also just want to say that this is my work. It's my heart work. My last name is Lockhart, and I love that that's in my name because my work is heart work. And I will be doing a workshop about this, communicating across divides, actually called Bridging Divides, the name of the workshop, on October 2nd. So if that would be something that would be interesting to you, you can look me up. My website is corylockhart.com, and you can just go to classes there. And as Kristen said, I have been consulting with her for the new program and the Civil Dialogue program. She remembers the name. I don't quite remember it, but it is exciting. And that's another way to just dive into some of these practices. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing screen, which means I get to look at you again. And I'd love to hear questions that you have.
All right. Well, thank you again, Cory. This is obviously extremely important work, especially in our current times, and we're just grateful to have you here, and we're grateful for the work that you're doing. And as Cory said, now is time for questions and answers, and so if you would please direct your questions to me, you can type them in the chat, and we will have a Q&A. So Cory, our first question is years ago, our schools used a thing called conflict resolution to quell children's disagreements in fights. Have you heard of this? Have you heard of this before? And if so, do you want to say a little bit about how this might compare to nonviolent communication, or maybe even how this compares to other methods of mediation or conflict resolution?
Yeah, so I know that there are schools that use an NVC, a nonviolent communication framework, for conflict resolution. And even if they aren't consciously using or kind of, specifically using nonviolent communication framework, a lot of conflict resolution structures are very similar in that idea of connecting to the emotions, of connecting to what my experience is, right? Because when I'm talking about my own experience, that's again taking me out of that framework of blaming you, shaming you, etc., and just owning what is going on for me. And I think the more that we can again just own our own experience, recognizing perhaps that another person has stimulated what's happening in me, but doing it in a way that that's not blaming them for it. And I say that because when I am dependent on you, when I'm saying you made me mad, she made me happy, he made me mad, or whatever, really what I'm doing is giving that person a lot of power over how I am. It's not to say that what they have done is not stimulating the feelings in me, but if I can bring that awareness of this is what's happening in me, then that also gives me some agency to try and do something about it, and or to ask for some support in helping helping me to meet my needs in another way. I hope that answers the question. I think the more that we can do conflict resolution, restorative justice, etc., the better off our world will. The more, I'm going to say it, not the better off, the closer to healing and whole our world will be.
Absolutely. And speaking of healing and wholeness, do you have any suggestions for family units? This person is asking about how sometimes the most difficult work happens with people that we're closest to, and these patterns have developed over years and generations. Do you have any suggestions about how to deal with these sorts of relationships?
Yes, two things come to mind. The first is, if this is a practice that you want to engage with, start with the easier stuff first so that you can build some skill and some confidence. Knowing, what that person said is right on. In our family patterns, we have built years and decades and even, as you said, generations of patterns. And so changing those patterns also may take years and decades and generations, even if we can take one step towards healing. My deep belief is that as we do our own personal healing work, as I said at the beginning, it ripples out. And I believe that if we're talking about our family systems, it not only ripples out towards those who follow me, I also believe that that is helping us in the process of ancestral healing. And I think if we are trying to do that work, and it's with people we love, I think hopefully if we say something like, I really want to change these patterns because they're not working for me, and bring that vulnerability. I really want to be connected with you. And I know because we have these patterns that are generations long that it's going to take some time, but I'm wondering if we can experiment. I like to use the words practice and experiment, because that also helps us to give grace when things don't go the way that we want. Can we experiment with trying something different? Can we practice trying something different? And I'll stop there.
How about this? What positive role, if any, does moral discernment play in communication?
Will you ask that question again? I got distracted because I opened the comments.
Oh, sure. What positive role, if any, does moral discernment play in communication? I might be able to elaborate on that one.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, would you say a little more?
Well, that person who wrote this is welcome to say more in the chat, but I'm imagining, in the initial quote, in the field beyond, where there's a field beyond right and wrong, and meeting someone there, what happens, when we have our own ideas of what right and wrong are, when we have our own ideas of morality, what role do these ideas play in our communication with one another?
I have found that the more and the deeper that I go into this nonviolent communication work, the less I want to be outside of that field. And this again is related to something that I've heard Mickey talk about. We can talk about, Mickey Cashtan is her name. We can talk about whether something's fair and unfair all we want. If there are not resources to make things more fair or make things more moral or more just, then there's not a lot of point to having the conversation about whether it's fair or not. If I can focus on what the needs are, and this again is Mickey Cashtan, she says, I have this deep belief that if we were to put all the needs on the table, if we then put all of the resources available on the table, and if we put all of the known and anticipated impacts on the table, we would be able to figure out how to meet the needs. That's not the paradigm that we live in. We live in a paradigm of deserving and undeserving, and this person deserves to have their needs met, and that person doesn't deserve to have their needs met. And I think that can get in the way of actually meeting the needs. Thinking about even in the US, the criminal justice system, where it's very much about punishment and very much not about restoration, because we want them to pay for what they've done. And what I'm not saying is that we don't want accountability, but are there ways that we can encourage accountability that are restorative as opposed to punitive, that build people up so that they do have the resources to act differently in the world, as opposed to breaking them down more or in the same way, and they continue in those patterns. I don't know if that answered the question or not, but that's where my mind went.
I think that touched on a lot of important questions that are in here that unfortunately we don't have time to get to all of them, but I do want to ask one question that I think is particularly important, and it is a request if you could say more about situations where there's danger. We have a lot of situations like those these days. If you can just say more about how to navigate conversations as we try to help others understand the danger that might be involved in approaching these conversations?
So I think I'm a little unclear. Are we talking about when there is imminent harm happening?
If you could say something about that, or maybe also
The danger of going to these vulnerable places.
Yes, and perhaps even situations that are potentially traumatic, or where there is, where there's potential trauma involved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So first of all, if we're in a context where someone is in danger, we're not having these spacious, slow conversations. What we are trying to do is stop the harm that's being done. That is the most immediate. That's the most immediate need, right? Is to get ourselves or get the other person outside of that situation of danger. Having these conversations can trigger things. Can even, if these are long-standing patterns, or we have long-standing patterns even outside of this particular dynamic, might bring up trauma. And I think that, again, is where that question about, is this worth my time and energy, is really important. And thinking about, yes, I want to be in this conversation, and I'm also conscious that I have trauma, or that this may be really triggering for me. And so even as I deeply believe that this is an important conversation, am I resourced enough to be in it and to be well myself in it? Do I need support either prior to the conversation, during the and or during the conversation, and or after the conversation? If we're dealing with a power dynamic and we're in the power down place, whether it's structurally or familiarly or because of the job that we're in, we may want support. If we are the person in the power up, the encouragement is to really hold awareness of how vulnerable it is if it's, our child or an employee or, someone who, because of the structures of our world, we have more structural or systemic power, really being aware of that this conversation is riskier for them than it is for me. And if that's the case, I want to be really, really, really clear that, at least for myself, I want to be really, really clear for that person that just because I want to be in the conversation with them, that they can say no, that they can take that agency so that it is a little bit less risky for that person. But really, I think the more consciousness that we can bring in to even whether or how we're going to have the conversation, the better. That might include journaling. That might include, again, having a support system for ourselves and for the other person before, during, and after.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Cory, and thank you for answering these questions. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to get to all of them, but this is just encouragement to attend Cory's workshop coming up, and it also, a lot of the questions that you asked are addressed in our upcoming program. So thanks again, Cory, and if you all would, even though you're on mute, a silent round of applause and gratitude.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely to be with you. I wish we had more time, but
yes,
I'm grateful for what we did get into.
Well, a shameless plug here. I encourage you to check out our programs on a multitude of social justice topics, which include poverty, racial justice, immigration justice, nonviolence, which Cory wrote, eco-justice and spirituality and others. Check out our programs, and you can bring them to your own communities and do them with your church, your friends, your family. And as Cory mentioned, coming up, we have an 8-session program that we're currently working on and piloting. It's called Want to Talk: Communication Tools for Divided Times. So this program, which Cory is consulting with us on, is designed for people who want to learn how to navigate tough conversations while at the same time staying true to their values. So I wanted to tell you about why we decided to write this program, because I think it'll give you the sense of like the heart of it. We realize that so many of our folks in our JustFaith community across the nation, we're dealing with polarization. We're dealing with polarization in our churches, in our communities, in our own families. And we wanted to be able to support our community in talking to people who think differently than we do about things we care so deeply about, and to talk with one another in a way that does not compromise our deep commitments to things like anti-racism, environmental justice, and those other priorities we hold so dear. And then at the same time, we saw folks who were emerging from our racial justice program, and they and we are fired up to create systemic change. And we want to talk to people about what we've learned and don't necessarily feel equipped to do that in a way that people can hear. So we started to work on, touch on this subject, and I started to do some research on this subject of nonviolent communication. And as I was immersed in this research, just, trying to help our staff decide whether to do this or not, I thought first and foremost, it would be helpful to all of us in navigating these divided times that we're in. And absolutely it was and is. But at the same time, I also found that these tools also have enormous implications for my own relationships with the people that I'm closest with, as they give me tools to talk through disagreements and have conversations about those things that really matter to me. So all that to say, if any of this resonates with you, please consider bringing this program to your community. Our country needs better communication tools right now. We need Cory's wisdom. This program will be out on October the 19th. And please let us know how we can support you in getting started. You can email or call or email me, or call or email Leela, or really any of our staff members. But we hope that we can be in solidarity with you as we learn better communication tools for working for justice. And with that, I would like to introduce Jim Carney. Jim Carney lives with his wife of 46 years, Mary Lou. They live in Roseville, Minnesota. Jim is currently in his 5th year on our board of directors, where he serves as the chair of the Strategic Planning Committee, no small task. He first participated in JustFaith in 2008 and has facilitated the program in 2 different parishes that he has attended. He was one of the founding members of the JustFaith Twin Cities Network, and that in this network helps to organize and facilitate activities around Minneapolis and St. Paul. Jim holds a PhD in electrical engineering and retired 2 years ago after leading a research and technology team on a major medical device company. Jim is the father of 3 grown children and the grandfather of 6 grandchildren, 2 of whom he and Mary Lou have been providing daycare during this COVID hibernation season. He and Mary Lou are anxiously awaiting the birth of grandchild number 7 in just a matter of days. And so now you all have the pleasure of hearing a little bit from Jim Carney.
Well, thank you, Kristen. I hope you can hear me here. Hello, everyone else. As Kristen said, my name is Jim Carney, and I'm speaking to you from Roseville, Minnesota, which is a suburb just north of St. Paul. So when I was first asked to spend a few minutes to give my testimony about JustFaith, I thought, okay, that's fine. Yeah, I can do that. I've spoken about things like this before, but then I thought about it a little bit and thought, first off, I've got to follow Cory. And that's no small task. And I haven't done anything like Cory has done in the past. And I thought of it a little more, and, I haven't helped start a shelter for families experiencing homelessness like one of our neighboring parishes did after they completed a JustFaith program. I haven't provided support or started a group to provide support for a Native American community like another JustFaith program did. So I thought this could really be embarrassing. But then I thought, okay, I do have my story to tell, and so here it is. So I was raised Catholic, Catholic schools, Catholic church. which for someone of my generation means I learned an awful lot about rules and regulations, but not an awful lot about what Jesus actually taught and did. Now, that started to change about 15 years ago when I began digging deeper into my spirituality and developing a personal relationship with God. One day, a couple of years into that journey, I turned to my wife and said, I think I'm being told to put my faith into action. Problem was, I didn't know where to start. But luckily, a few weeks later, I opened our parish bulletin, and there was a blurb titled, "Put your faith into action, join JustFaith." And I thought, great, there's the answer, timely fashion. I'm going to be loaded onto a bus with a whole bunch of other great people, and we're going to go and serve the poor. Well, for most of you that's not actually what JustFaith does. To my surprise, I was told to stop talking about and thinking about serving the poor. Instead, consider building relationships and walking in solidarity with those who are marginalized. I had my eyes opened to a significant number of systems of injustice and inequality that existed locally and worldwide. And I learned that the best way to change these systems was to go to their root cause and then push for that change. Now, I'm an engineer by training, so that idea about going to the root cause made an awful lot of sense to me. And so once I finished that 30-week program, I thought I want to do something about systems, get involved. And luckily, again, as things like this tend to happen, I ended up on the advisory board for our local Catholic Campaign for Human Development and spent 4 years talking with dozens of poverty-led nonprofits around the Twin Cities and discussed their proposals. Now, these groups had identified solutions to problems that their community needed, but they needed the funding to get those solutions implemented. Now, the concept of building relationships was a little bit harder for me to get my arms around. After I facilitated the JustFaith program the following year, I felt called to address homelessness in the community. But again, I was pretty ignorant about what that was all about. So to get my feet on the ground, I started volunteering a day a week at Catholic Charities, managing the shower and laundry room for those who were unhoused and came to breakfast that morning. I got a chance to talk to and be taught by a number of just great, marvelous people who, just because of unfortunate circumstances, happened to be without a home. Now, after I facilitated JustFaith the second time, I had a similar calling. This time was to do something about and learn about the horrible white versus black education gap in Minnesota. So I began volunteering as a tutor in a majority black school. 5 years ago, I was honored to be asked to join the JustFaith Board of Directors. And since then, I've seen it from the inside. And you know what? It's even better than I thought. And I've loved being a part of an organization that produces the high quality, timely programs like the Racial Equity Series or the Eco Justice Series or the program on nonviolence. Now I'm even more convinced that my time and talent and treasures are going to the right place. And I'm thrilled that I'm supporting JustFaith to help people like me become informed about systems of injustice and to put their faith into action. JustFaith helped me align my spirituality and beliefs with my actions for social justice. It helped me understand to listen to what God is asking me to be. And I plan to continue on that path and see what God has planned next. In fact, my wife and I are starting into JustFaith and Racial Equity program on Monday, so I may find out very soon what that is. After participating in JustFaith programs, it was obvious that the way I looked at and approached the world had changed for the better. So I started making annual contributions to support what I viewed as a valuable organization. After joining the board, I was also surprised to learn how truly dependent JustFaith is on donations from people like me to keep turning out these programs. Over the last 5 years, 70 to 75% of JustFaith's operating budget came from individual donations. So I invite each of you to join me in supporting this wonderful and impactful ministry so that it can continue to change people for the better. And with that, I turn it back to you, Kristen.
Actually, Jim, I'm going to take it from here.
Wow, you take it.
Thank you very much for sharing your heartfelt support for JustFaith Ministries and for all you do for our ministry. We'd love to invite you to join us next Thursday, September 16th, to hear from Reverend Dr. Angelique Walker-Smith, who is a senior associate for Pan-American and Orthodox faith engagement at Bread for the World, as she outlines a roadmap to end hunger in the United States and around the world by 2030. She will explore 4 categories that will make this goal possible, including food systems, sustainability, climate change and climate justice, economic justice, and racial and gender equity. You'll find that registration link in the chat. Our closing prayer comes from an adaptation from a litany used by Seeker's Church on Thanksgiving 2003. It's called Awaken. The new day reveals itself in every moment, and by the grace of God, all things are made possible. Come, let us give thanks. We give thanks to you, blessed, mysterious life giver, for one more day to experience the miracle of creation. With every breath, we remember that life is a gift, and we give thanks. And with every step, we know the wonder of waiting on the earth, and we give thanks. And with every word, we affirm God's transforming love for each of us, and we give thanks. Holy beloved, through you all times are made new. Creation is full of your glory. All praise is yours. We thank you for attending this evening's presentation. We hope you join us the next 2 Thursdays as we conclude our 20th anniversary celebration. Thank you. Good night. God bless.